Hello and welcome back to another episode of Mr. V's Camping Chair Chat. My name is Mr. V and I am currently sat in a camping chair, even though you can't really see it. Look, it is here. But because of this weird camera angle, I'm at my desk in basically the live stream setup. For those of you who watch that, because of this weird setup, you can't see the camping chair, but I know you guys are going to riot if you can't see one. So what I'll do is I'll green screen myself into another camping chair, and then the whole thing can be floating in space, I guess, just to keep things on brand around here. Welcome back. There was no podcast last weekend. I did record a podcast for last weekend after the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, twice, in fact. One time in a field, but the video for that is completely ruined. It looks like this. It's like pure white for lots of the runtime, and also it wasn't great. The audio's not great. I'm not great. It wasn't great. And then I recorded it again. So we were away for Easter. I recorded that in a field in the middle of nowhere in the countryside in England. Then I didn't have time to re-record. We had to travel back home after the Easter weekend. So I recorded it back here as kind of like a normal episode of the podcast. And then that had audio issues because I set the microphone up wrong. And so at this point, it was like Wednesday evening or Thursday following the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, like 3 or 4 days after the race. And I was just like, why have a race review almost a week later for a race that wasn't even very interesting? So there was no camping chair chat last weekend. I'm sorry about that for all of those of you who felt like you missed out, but we are back this weekend. There's no race this weekend or this Monday. We are in a little off week between Saudi Arabia and the Miami Grand Prix, heading over to the United States. And so I thought we'd have a little bit of a wrap up of some things and talk about how the season's going so far. We've had 5 races in 2025, or 5 Grand Prix weekends in 2025, because if you consider sprint races as races, which I don't, we have had 6 races, but 5 Grand Prix and 1 sprint in China, which puts us, a fifth of the way through the season. So I thought we'd kind of have a little talk about how the season's going so far. And specifically, I wanted to talk about qualifying. You may have heard a phrase thrown around through the last couple of races that we are in a qualifying championship this year. This is true, but what does that mean? And is this a bad thing? Should we be worried? Let's talk about that, and I'll give some of my opinions on that, but to sum it up, no. As in, no, it's not bad. It's a good thing, but I think it's a thing that Formula 1 has kind of forgotten how to love, and maybe some newer fans aren't used to, kind of maybe the excitement of having a weekend largely decided on a Saturday, because that is not the end of the world, I promise you. We'll get into it. Just to wrap up a couple of things from last weekend, obviously Saudi Arabia, turn 1 instant. It was talked to death by every single Formula 1 content creator and their grandmothers. I talked about it when I did try and record this last weekend. I'm not going to talk about it much now. Basically, the decision was correct. Max Verstappen should have got a penalty for sending it over turn 2 and not slowing down, because you have to drive on the racetrack when you go racing. That's how it works. Obviously, there was the steward's decision talking about Oscar ahead of the apex. It was Oscar's corner, blah, blah, blah. And people have talked about the issues with this terminology and the issues with this clarification to the sporting guidelines that was released partway through last year. And I kind of agree with the general sentiment, which is this guidebook talking about alongside at the apex, like the overtaking driver requires room, blah, blah, blah. I don't like it. Firstly, alongside at the apex is a crazy thing. If they're suggesting that drivers have to judge whether they're significantly alongside the apex, that's an insane thing to ask someone to judge at 200 miles an hour, or maybe not 200, but still fast miles an hour. And secondly, not the final thing, but secondly, at the apex, where is the apex? Where is the apex? Point to me the apex. Geometric apex, racing line apex. in that case, whose racing line? Some people like to take a square line and like a late apex. Some people like a shallow line or a karting line with an early apex. It doesn't vary that much in Formula 1. They're all relatively similar, but still, the apex is not an infinitesimally small point in space. Stupid. I don't like it. Yes, Oscar made a valid overtake attempt, but the way the rules are written, and it just talks about being alongside of the apex, kind of justifies that you can make an absolute dive bomb from 4 car lengths back, and as long as you get ahead a little bit, partway through the corner, doesn't matter if you run the other person off. So don't like that. That is bad. Max Verstappen should have got a penalty. I do think, even without the penalty, Oscar may have won the race. People talk about Max was less than 5 seconds behind at the end, but he was behind, if you know what I mean. Like, through the whole first stint, Oscar was very close to Max. I do get the feeling that McLaren could have pushed Oscar more to overtake Max. Not easy to overtake in Saudi Arabia, but they could have pushed him further forwards, and I think he could have got round him, whereas the same is not true the other way around. So I do believe Oscar would have still won, even without that penalty. It would have been very close. But yeah, I don't want to dwell on that one too much. But I do want to make the point that leads me into talking about qualifying this year, that Saudi Arabia was the first time in 2025 that the race was not won from pole position. But a couple asterisks on that. Some people would argue that without the penalty, Max would have won from pole position. We will never know. There's obviously a chance of it, but I do think Oscar still would have won this thing. But I would make the argument, the counter argument, Max Verstappen should not have been on pole position. Now, I'm not taking anything away from Max. What I'm saying is all conventional logic going through Q1 and Q2 would have suggested that Oscar Piastri was going to get pole position. But it was just Max, being Max, pulled a worldy lap out at the end of Q3. And had a huge improvement over his previous best time. It's just Max doing Max things. I'm not taking anything away from him. Phenomenal qualifying lap. He's put in some crazy laps in Jeddah in the past, and this was one of them. So hats off to him to get that pole position that he probably shouldn't have got. It was quite an interesting one looking at the stats for Q3 in Saudi Arabia. Actually, only 4 drivers in Q3 improved on their Q2 time, which would suggest actually the track was getting worse as we got later into the evening, on the sort of Saturday evening in Jeddah. Only 4 drivers improved, which are the front 4, which is probably why they ended up as the front 4 on the grid. And of those 4, the person with the best improvement over their Q2 time was Max Verstappen. Obviously, if we'd gone by Q2 times, it would have been Oscar on pole, maybe Lando, but obviously he crashed in Q3, so not him. So yeah, just Max being a class above still is the reason he was on pole. All conventional logic, all kind of like sane betting tactics would have suggested Oscar would have been on pole, and if that was the case, and he did go on to win, we would have had 5 races out of 5 won from pole position. But fret not, my dear Formula 1 fans, because we at least have some variety in qualifying this year. And so you've heard people talking about this is a qualifying championship, suggesting that races are decided on a Saturday. And this is true, but some people say that like it's a bad thing, and I would make the argument that it's not, and that actually it's still a very exciting thing. Like Formula 1, not just this year or last year, for many years, for decades even, has been lamented by some for having boring action on a Sunday, particularly in the hybrid era since 2014. There's been an argument from detractors of Formula 1 that the racing on a Sunday isn't always, well, even there. There is no racing on a Sunday, and then it's not very good. Obviously, this is on a case-by-case basis. Any given year, we do have exciting races, and we get some absolute stinkers. And actually, Saudi Arabia was one of them, along with, I want to say, Japan was very boring indeed. This has always been a thing. And so actually, if that's the case, if Formula 1 is prone to races with not much racing in, well, surely it's a good thing if we then have a competitive Saturday, if we then have competitive qualifying. So people have been saying that 2025 is going to be a qualifying championship, and I say, go for it. Thank you. Thank you very much. Very cool, because qualifying is a fantastic session in Formula One. This is the fastest that the fastest cars in the world will ever go. Qualifying in Formula One is the test of human engineering achievement. It is the quickest lap times ever. And so qualifying is a great session, but I do believe that in recent years, some Formula One fans may have lost the love of qualifying. It's still exciting, don't get me wrong. I don't think anyone thinks that qualifying is boring. People don't treat it like it's like practice one or anything. But at the same time, I don't think it quite has the hype of the race. And I think that's a shame, because qualifying is often as exciting, if not more. I do believe part of that is because in the last few years, we've had a series of years where qualifying has been basically a foregone conclusion. Obviously, in the last 3 years, well, at least the last couple, is basically guaranteed that Max Verstappen is going to get pole position. I was going to say, in the first 5 races this year, we have only had 3 people on pole. We had, obviously, Norris in Australia, then Piastri, Verstappen, Piastri, Verstappen. But last year, in the first 5 races, our pole sitters were Verstappen, 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 Verstappen in the first 5 races. And actually, he got pole the first 7 races of the year. It wasn't until Monaco, the 8th round of the championship, that Charles Leclerc got a pole position and someone else started at the front. And 2023 is not the crazy outlier in recent Formula One memory, because look back not too long ago, 2020 and previous, and you could put some pretty safe bets on the fact that Mercedes were going to have pole position and quite likely a front row lockout. I mean, Max Verstappen had something to say about that, but a betting man would have bet on Lewis Hamilton or potentially Valtteri Bottas, because they were just so dominant that qualifying was basically decided before it even started. And so it's been honestly quite a while since you've had a Formula One season where anyone could get pole position any weekend. 2021 was a bit closer, and in the last couple of years we have had other people getting in there. I want to say particularly in 2022. But really, 23 and 24 has just been the Max Verstappen show. Other people were getting poles in the second half of last year, but you know what I mean. It's been a long time since basically before the hybrid era that qualifying was anyone's game. And I think for that reason, it's lost its excitement for some fans. But I love qualifying. And so if we are back to a Formula One where qualifying becomes as important, as much of a spectacle as the race, I'm all for it. I'm happy to have a qualifying championship. And you know what? It's only an hour. You get a nice little break between Q1 and Q2. I can put the kettle on. Don't have to sit there and watch people lap around Suzuka doing nothing for 2 hours. Qualifying is great viewing experience. And so I wanted to talk about just how good qualifying has been so far this year. Obviously, if you've been watching, you will have noticed how close it is, particularly in Q1 and Q2, how close the margins are for people to get knocked out or to go through. But sometimes, it is good to put things into numbers, into perspective, to really actually categorize this. So I've gone through, churned some of the numbers from the first 5 races of this year, compared them to last year. And so I was looking at the Q3 spread, so the top 10 lap time spread of the first 5 races this year, and on average in 2025 so far, the top 10 in Q3 is separated by 1.09 seconds, which actually I thought it would be less. I thought it was going to be under a second. We have had some races. So the Japanese Grand Prix, top 10 was separated by just 0.88. And also in Australia, it was 0.96. But then the other 3 has been over a second. I will say we've got Bahrain of 1.4, a bit of an outlier, which is kind of skewing these results up. But Top 10, incredibly close. And actually, the entire field, incredibly close. We've had some races where the gap between P1 and P20 in Q1 is, 1.5, that kind of thing, which is insane. It means people can be flip-flopping between like P17 and P7 between their banker and their push lap in Q1. And it makes it just so hot. And it's so pivotal for these teams lower down the grid as well, because qualifying 9th instead of 16th gives such a huge advantage to potentially then pick up some points in the race. It is crazy important for these lower teams to be doing well in qualifying, but now the difference between doing well or doing badly in qualifying can be like 0.1, 0.09, that kind of thing. Incredibly fine margins, puts it right back into like a driver skill championship, not just who's hired the most expensive bald aerodynamicist championship. It's amazing. So 1.09 this year. Last year, I looked at the first 5 races and it was similar, but obviously small margins make a big difference. So last year in the first 5 races, the average top 10 was separated by 1.256, which means we've lost about 15 hundredths, 0.15, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that is significant. That's over a 10% improvement in closeness, and you can feel that. Like, if that continued going down further, if the average Q3 was separated by 0.85, it would be insane. That would be pure insanity, like it was in Japan. And so, like, it doesn't sound like much, but qualifying now is unbelievably tight and unbelievably entertaining. It's so good this year so far. I was looking through as well the qualifying gaps between teammates so far this year, just to like get a feel of which team's actually doing well, which drivers are actually doing well, because it can be deceptive watching the races. Some drivers, a good performance can get kind of lost in there, and sometimes a bad performance is actually worse than you initially realize. So I was looking through the kind of teammate gaps. What I've done here is literally just take the time gap between teammates, added them all up, and then averaged them out over a number of races. So for most teammates, it's like divided by 5. But then obviously for cases like Verstappen and Lawson, it's just the average of their 2 races together. So you may be unsurprised to hear that the closest teammate head-to-head so far in 2025 is at Williams. Albon and Sainz, obviously both experienced drivers at this point in their careers. Albon is in his 2019, 20, missed one, 22, 3, 5th season. Feels like more. I guess you kind of forget that he had a year out. And Sainz is in his fucking like 10th, 11th season. That dude is old. So obviously both seasoned drivers. Albon has been in that team for longer, but Sainz, after falling behind him a couple times in the first couple of races this year, has now showed up and showed whomst the fuck he is, and has also out-qualified Albon a couple times. I believe the overall head-to-head is 3-2 in Albon's favour, but the overall time difference is only 0.0178. So 1/100th, just under 2 100ths gap on average between those two is insane to see like how well they're comparing. Actually as well, we only have 2 teams with the same driver pairing as last year, McLaren and Aston Martin. And so you would expect when you have like one new driver and one driver who's been in the team for a while, it would take more than 5 races for them to get level. And so incredibly impressive from Sainz's perspective. I think visually it's maybe looked more impressive from Albon. Like he's done well. It's just been kind of highlighted more in the broadcast. But I will say, Sainz, is doing Sainz things. He did similar things when he showed up at Ferrari and basically straight away was like right there on the pace of Leclerc. Beat Leclerc on points in their first season by like 1 point, but still, a win's a win. And so it's just Sainz doing Sainz things. Incredibly consistent, incredibly like quick driver at getting up to speed. One wonders what would have happened if he had gone to Red Bull, but we will never know. You may then be surprised if I asked you which team was next closest in their qualifying head-to-head. You may go with like McLaren would be a good choice. They are 3rd best. You would maybe go with, I don't know, maybe like Racing Bulls, because despite Hadjar having two different teammates, it's been very close to both of them. Racing Bulls, well, the Hadjar Lawson and Hadjar Sonoda matchups are actually 4th and 5th on the list respectively. Hadjar on average is quicker than Lawson by 0.15, and on average was quicker than Sonoda by 0.19. But the closeness with two different drivers, I think, really shows just the drivability of that car, in that you can like chuck Lawson out, he has to go and get like emotionally abused for a couple of races by Helmut Marko and the media, and then comes back and gets straight in the car and is actually, in theory, quicker than Sonoda was. I think it shows the drivability of what Racing Bulls have done there. But no, all of these teams have been beaten by someone else. Haas is the second closest teammate head-to-head. Caveat though, this is a bit of a skewed one, and this is where like straight first-degree data can let us down, because technically, Oliver Behrman is winning the teammate qualifying head-to-head on time. So I think Ocon has outqualified him 3-2, or maybe even 4-1. I know Behrman was ahead in Saudi Arabia, but other than that, I think Ocon's been ahead in all the other races. Anyway, in pure like who was further up the grid, Ocon is winning. But time-wise, Behrman is actually ahead, because when Ocon has outqualified Behrman, it's been by smaller margins, but then Behrman has like swung it around and outqualified Ocon by some quite serious time gaps when he has done that. And so fair play. So Behrman is actually, on average, ahead of Ocon by 0.02 seconds. Not much at all, but it's always good for a rookie to come and be ahead. He's not being absolutely demolished in the same way that, let's say, like Antonelli or Aduin is, who are right down the bottom of the list, or Liam Lawson against Verstappen. So yeah, actually very, very impressive from Oliver Behrman, or one could argue a bit mid from Ocon. Esteban, I think some people were expecting more from you. You should be beating this little British kid. But I will say, yeah. So Ocon has outqualified Behrman. Let me get the numbers up. So Ocon beat him in China. We actually don't take results from Australia because Behrman didn't have a qualifying time, and so there's no representative numbers. Behrman then qualifies ahead in Japan by over 0.4 seconds, which really helps his gap. Ocon is then ahead again in Bahrain by 0.8. What the hell? But then Behrman qualifies ahead once more in Saudi Arabia by another half a second. And so it flip-flops massively. And I will say that's probably Behrman doing the flopping. I would imagine Ocon is the much more consistent one in the Haas. Behrman seems to be flopping between not great, I wouldn't say washed, but let's say very expected results for a rookie, and then absolute worldy qualifying performances. If he could tune into something and start doing those every single weekend, he's going to see himself in a top team before long, because like those qualifyings, when he does finish ahead of Ocon, are crazy times. Obviously, he's been in Q3 already in a Haas, which is not easy to do. Yeah, Oliver Behrman, search back in your mind to what you were doing on like the morning of the Saudi Arabian qualifying. Do that again, mate. Whatever you had for breakfast, have it again, because it worked. Christ alive, that kid is super quick when he like links everything up. I think maybe actually he's just naturally quick, but it's just making lots of mistakes. We've obviously seen a couple of crashes, and so I get the feeling that he's just had like multiple qualifying laps hampered by like a single corner where you hit a curb too hard, lose grip coming out of a corner, lose like 0.8, that kind of thing. Interesting. Anyway, we go down the qualifying head-to-heads. Williams closest, Haas second. Then we have McLaren. Piastri is ahead of Norris, but still by less than 0.1, 0.079. Or 0.0796, so 0.08 if we round it, which is incredibly close, but Piastri is ahead, which is interesting. I guess he has 2 pole positions to Norris's 1, so that's not that surprising. We then have both the RB stints. Then it's Sauber, Hülkenberg, ahead of Bortoleto, but interestingly, of all the rookie pairings, they're the next closest one. And Hülkenberg is no slouch in qualifying, so that is impressive for Bortoleto. I will say the way this is done is you have to take times from the same qualifying sessions, so both from Q1 or both from Q2. So if one driver goes out in Q1 and the other one makes it through to Q2, you have to take both of their Q1 times, because the numbers become fully unrepresentative if you take everyone's final qualifying time. You obviously have track possession, progression, or you can have the inverse of that, where you have Q1 and it's dry and then it starts raining, and so Q2 times are slower, that kind of thing. So this will be from sessions, the last session every weekend, where Hulkenberg and Bortoleto are in the same session, but typically they're only separated by 0.2. For seasoned teammates, you would want them to be closer, around the 0.1 mark, like the Piastri Norris, but again, for Bortoleto, very impressive up against Hulkenberg, who is not, the greatest qualifier of all time, but it is a good one, mind you. And so we love to see it. Then we have Ferrari. Obviously, there's been lots of talk of the struggles of Lewis Hamilton. I'm not going to say that he's not struggling, but the qualifying gap between Hamilton and Leclerc is, on average, 0.3. It's 0.3126. Leclerc ahead of Hamilton. But then again, Hamilton is jumping into a new car against potentially the best qualifier in Formula One. No, I'm not saying it's a guarantee that Leclerc is best. Like, Verstappen is incredible in Q3. Norris and Piastri, both of them are incredible. George Russell is doing absolute bits this season in qualifying. So I'm not going to come out and say like Leclerc is this godsend, greatest to ever do it in qualifying, but not an easy teammate to beat. And even like when Carlos Sainz jumped into that team, Leclerc was firmly in the lead in their qualifying head-to-head. They were close, but Leclerc was in the lead over all the years they were together. Sainz just like made up the places in the race typically. And so 0.3 is not the like devastating fumble start to the season that some people have portrayed Hamilton's Ferrari stint to be currently. I think that's kind of okay. I kind of would have expected to be a little bit closer, call it like a 0.2 to a 0.25, but it's not like the half a second plus that some reports would have you believe. We have people talking about, it's going to be like a full year until Hamilton learns how to qualify this thing. I don't know. It's all I'm saying is it's kind of fine, is the headline here. But not great. Like, I mean, if Ferrari was a championship winning car, there's no doubt about it that Leclerc would be trouncing Hamilton, like when it came to actual points after the races. But they're not, so that kind of does ease pressure off Hamilton a little bit. And also, it's Lewis Hamilton. He doesn't have any pressure. He's getting paid like fucking hundreds of billions of dollars a year, so it's not like he's going to get fired from Ferrari, is he? We then go down. We have Aston Martin. Alonso's ahead of Stroll by 0.35 on average. We don't need to say anything about that. And then we actually have Mercedes. And while Kimi Antonelli has been doing very well this season and has had, I want to say, at least one qualifying where he was right next to Russell, and he's had a couple where he's only off Russell by like one place. Despite all of this, the actual gap, the average gap between Russell and Antonelli is 0.3668, which is actually huge. I think that is like, it's screwed massively by... Okay, we've got things like Australia where Russell was ahead of Antonelli by almost 0.6 in either Q1 or Q2 because Antonelli went out early. And then we've got like China, Russell was ahead by 0.4, that kind of thing. But other than that, they're like, since then, they've been within about 0.2 of each other. Saudi Arabia's a bit further apart again. But yeah, this has kind of been hidden. Like, people talking about how well Antonelli is doing, and actually has one of the worst qualifying head-to-heads against his teammate. But I will say, in the same way as Lewis Hamilton, I'm not going to hold that against him too much, because I would say this season, Russell has been top one when it comes to qualifying form. Like, Russell has been absolutely formidable. Was off was off Piastri and Verstappen in Saudi Arabia by only a tenth. Like, was trying to sneak in there into the front row. Has obviously been like by far the most consistent driver in just even picking up podiums so far this year. Ludicrous scenes from George Russell. He is having probably the best season of his career so far, and qualifying is where he earns his cash, really. He still is Mr. Saturday. That moniker kind of went away. He obviously gained this in his Williams era. that title kind of went away a bit in Mercedes because it wasn't as evident, like not dragging a Williams up into Q2 and potentially Q3 sometimes. He remains Mr. Saturday. George Russell is different gravy on Saturday afternoon. I would say not even gravy. He's like a IKEA meatballs cream sauce. I don't know if you would even class that as gravy anymore. It is good though. It is good. We then get down. We have the Alpine gap, which is basically half a second from Gasly to Doohan. Once again, Gasly has been on very good form this year. Doohan is not. I keep saying because I keep watching practice and everything, and Doohan looks like he's doing so well. But then whenever we get to competitive sessions, Doohan, it's like a different Doohan is there. And we get rid of practice Doohan, who for some reason is incredible, and we get like racing Doohan, who is just not doing it. Pardon the pun. He's really been struggling when the stopwatch like starts spinning, and yeah, half a second is sadly the kind of fuel that like a Briatore would need to swap him out for, let's say, a Franco Colapinto. That is not good, even for a rookie. Like half a second is kind of not okay. We can justify a 0.3, even as high as like a 0.4, but half a second is way too far. That means that you're consistently going out in a different qualifying session. You're consistently going out in Q2 when your teammate's up in Q3, that kind of thing. That's kind of rough, mate. We then come down, though, after Alpine. The two least close qualifying head-to-heads of 2025 so far are Verstappen over Tsunoda after 3 races, currently sitting at 0.539. And, you know, Tsunoda's new into the car and famously not an easy car to drive. 0.539 is a lot, though. And then we have Verstappen over Lawson. They only had 2 races together, mind you, so it's not a big sample size. Data very skewed, but the average of those two, 0.913. Oh, Liam. Well, yeah, that's been talked about, so we don't need to talk about that. But it's kind of crazy that Verstappen Tsunoda and Verstappen Lawson are the 2 most unequal matchups in qualifying. But again, it's Max Verstappen. Like, one could make an argument that he is the best qualifier in Formula 1 at the moment. I would say George Russell, but I would be happy to put Max Verstappen maybe second place on his current form. So it's not an easy task for these two, but Jesus Christ, those are just like cold-blooded murders out on track. He straight up walked out here and just shot Lawson dead on the middle of Albert Park, and no one said a thing. So that is wild. But yeah, I think all of this goes to show we don't have a single teammate head-to-head that is greater than a second, which you would kind of hope, which is good. But we have multiple teammate head-to-heads. 3 of the current pairings, which are less than 0.2, with Sauber being exactly on 0.2. That is spicy stuff. And particularly in the case of like a Behrman Ocon, where you never know which one of them is going to be in front. Like, we can make a safe bet that probably Norris and Piastri would be pretty much equal, or Piastri would edge him out on current form. The similar thing with like Albon Sainz, but actually that form is turning, that tide is changing, and so Sainz has been probably the better bet in the last 2 races. But it's so interesting with cases like Behrman and Ocon, because that kid just dragging out these worldy performances, and it means that all of qualifying is so mixed up. I didn't look into like each team's representation in Q3. I would love to have some stats for you, but it takes a long time to like process these. But I think we can safely say that like we have no idea who is getting through to Q3 on any given weekend. I could not tell you which drivers to expect in Q3 in Miami. It is so up in the air. Like, obviously, the 2 McLarens, Verstappen, 2 Mercedes, and the 2 Ferraris. But then, like, you've got, 3 more spaces? But literally anyone, mate. Literally anyone could be in there. Could be Sainz and Albon. Could be goddamn Bortoletto, for all I know. It is fantastic. So, super happy about this. And as I was saying, I think some fans have kind of forgotten how to love a qualifying championship, or have never experienced Formula 1 when we had a really strong qualifying championship. But all I'll say is do not be disheartened. Do not be disheartened if we have races like Jeddah, like Japan, when not much happens on a Saturday, because it's not like we started the week from the Monday with a foregone conclusion as to who's picking up points, because any weekend on current form It could be Norris. It could be Piastri. It could be Verstappen. It even looks like Russell could get in there. If you travelled back in time a week and told me that Russell just won the Miami Grand Prix, I wouldn't even be that surprised, honestly. Anyone could be up there, and it just means you have to watch. Formula 1 has become a must-watch. Not every session. Don't watch P1. No one cares about that. But it is getting good. I've seen some people disappointed over a couple of the races we've had so far this season. All I'll say is, have some goddamn patience, man. 2 out of 5 races have been boring, and you're writing this season off as bad. Grow up. We had, one interesting race in 2022, and you stuck through it then. You can get through a kind of mid-Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Formula 1 is looking so good this year. The storylines are on form. Qualifying is on form. So many drivers are on form. Doing not one of them. So I feel like his days may be numbered. But it's just getting so good. I feel like I'm just like fangirling over Formula 1 at the moment. I wanted to talk about one other thing in this podcast, which is this last week. We have had some new information released from the organisers of the upcoming Madrid Grand Prix. I don't know technically what they're calling the track still. It's kind of unofficially being called the MADring. They've styled themselves as the MADring, obviously the Madrid Ring, similar to like the Nürburgring or like the Hockenheim Ring. It doesn't sound so good with mad. You need like a longer thing before ring. Like Österreich Ring is cool. Was it called that? I might just be making shit up. Anyway, MADring, bad. It's a bad name. Try again. I don't know if you've seen the logo they released for the MADring. For the audio-only people, they've released this like horrible, like complex tube-based logo. Ugh. Not good. I don't know what you're going for, but it didn't work. It's not good. And they've also released an update to track layout. So we had a kind of generic track layout for the MADring, because they put in some planning permission to construct some bespoke parts of track for this, including like a big bank section. And so we kind of knew from these planning permissions what the track was going to look like, but they have released a more official updated track map this week, and also a YouTube video, which I initially thought was like a fan edit and wasn't an official thing, but all evidence would suggest it is an official thing. Anyway, I'll put a link to it. There's an official video on the MADring YouTube channel where they have got like a new render of the track. It looks like Assetto Corsa, and they've got someone driving around it so you can see the flow of the track. I will say, the driver in that video almost spins at the chicane. It's like, would you not want to do another take? You spun on your own track. He doesn't fully spin, but he does lose it. So yeah, but also the track looks garbage. I cannot lie to you. From the information we got so far, this looks like one of the worst tracks to be added to Formula 1 for quite some time. Horrendously tight. Really nasty flow, just like a lot of weird tight corners. They've done the stupid thing, and they did a similar thing with Qiddiya. I don't know if you guys have seen, obviously you've probably seen pictures of the Qiddiya Speed Park, which is planned for a few years' time, and you've probably seen some people make like fan edits in Assetto Corsa of driving this track, showing what it might be like. And they seem to suggest we'd have these like horrible camber changes for lots of the track, horrible like lumps around some corners, which they would say is to make it more interesting. And like Qiddiya Speed, this is not just added by fans. The organisers of Qiddiya have said that they are adding like aggressive camber changes to the track to keep racing interesting. It's like, don't do that. Don't add massive lumps on the apex. That is not nice. And it's kind of the same thing in Madrid. We've just got these like weird changes in elevation around the track, weird, horrible tight sections. As I was watching it, it reminded me of... it actually did remind me of Sochi, just from watching particularly the second half of the lap. It reminds me of other street tracks. I want to say stuff like Valencia, kind of like the Baku Castle section. It just, I don't know, it's just nasty. Just a nasty track. Zero overtaking opportunities. Like, if racing in 2026 remains the same as 2025, I don't think we will see a single overtake around the MADring in its current form. It has like no significant straight sections, and all of them are preceded by corners that you cannot follow through. So if we still have cars affected by dirty air, I really don't think you're going to see any significant overtakes in that race. And just like some horrible flow braking sections. There's a chicane in the first sector, which is like one of the worst chicanes I've seen in a while, quite frankly. We have a banked section halfway around the lap, which is obviously trying to go in the same vein as like the final corner of Zandvoort, but it just, because of the placement in the lap, it doesn't have the same importance, therefore doesn't have the same interest. Like obviously the banking around Zandvoort then leads onto a main straight. And so if you nail that banking and the entrance onto it, you can then make an overtake at the end of the straight. But the banking in the MADring, you have this long banking and then immediately into another hard corner. And so there's no time to gain the benefit from a good run through the banking. So this track looks real bad. I'm seeing if I can potentially head down there at some point this year before the track is finished and just take a look, see if we can see some of the like construction of these new sections of the track. But also, you know, half the track is existing roads around this exhibition center on the outskirts of Madrid. And so you can just go around it now. We can get a feel for like how tight some of the corners are, that kind of thing. So if I can, I will take a quick little trip down to Madrid at some point this year and have a look around that track. But it looks real bad so far. And people say that Barcelona is not a good track for Formula One. You just wait until Barcelona is not even the worst track in Spain. God damn. So yeah, we await with bated breath to see just how awful the MADring would be. Maybe all these video game renders are not doing it justice and it will actually be fantastic. I don't think that's true. But yeah, exciting times for the future of Formula One. It's going to be interesting if we have to lose, like, it's looking like Imola is going to be lost to make way for this. That's not going to make some people very happy at all. Anyway, I wanted to just do a slightly quicker podcast this weekend, just to round up some things non-racing in Formula One. And so yeah, next weekend we have the Miami Grand Prix. Should be back as normal. I will endeavour not to have any technical difficulties and actually release the podcast on time. Hopefully we have a more interesting race than Jeddah. I plan to release a video just before the weekend talking about my thoughts on the Miami track and maybe a couple issues with it. But that being said, you can get some racing action in Miami, and so I hope for an exciting race. I hope for more battles between the McLaren boys and Verstappen. I really hope Russell can get in there on race pace as well. He's been up there in quali pace, but so far the Mercedes doesn't have the race pace. If they find that extra 10th and he gets in there, we have like a 4-way fight for the win of this race. Oh yes, please. So we remain hopeful, but until then, I've been Mr. V. Enjoy your week, and I'll Mr. C you later.